I'm going to start this video off with a quote. I don't like the term. Essentially, we're saying we're more outstanding than you. By the way, you've been eating our lunch for the last 20 years. But we're more exceptional than you. I don't like the term. That was a quote by Donald Trump in 2015. Hello, my name is Wellington. I have a bachelor's in history, a master's in intelligence studies with a focus on misinformation, deception, and propaganda. Spent 7.5 years really, in the infantry, where I deployed multiple times. And I've spent the last 7 years working in the intelligence community, or the IC. And today, we're going to talk about the dangers of teaching American exceptionalism. Now, as I told you, that quote was from Donald Trump in 2015 when asked about American exceptionalism. And now you might be wondering, what is American exceptionalism? Well, American exceptionalism is the idea that we, America, are the best, right? We are the number one country. Nobody's better than us. In a nutshell, I'm not going to give you the full definition. I'm sure you guys can look that up yourselves. But why am I talking about this today? Because over the last couple of days, mind you, it is January 2025. It is the 17th. And the last couple of days, I've been hearing that term, American exceptionalism, thrown around quite a bit. I've heard it in the news. I've heard it on a couple of podcasts that I listen to, especially when they talked about the one, What a Day from Crooked Media. They mentioned it. Is this the end of American exceptionalism, is what they said specifically when talking about Joe Biden's farewell speech. Is American exceptionalism a bad thing? Yes and no. It's twofold, like a sword. It's a double-edged sword. American exceptionalism can be a bad thing if utilized wrong. And this is what we're going to get into, right? Because even in 2015, Donald Trump wasn't a fan of the term American exceptionalism. He recognized that there were things that we need to fix. There were things that can be better. And I agree with him on that wholeheartedly. There are things that we can do better. There are things that we should do better. The question is how? And the question is, how do you distinguish between the patriotic side of American exceptionalism and the nationalistic side of American exceptionalism? Because they are very close and they muddy sometimes. And the dangers of it is what we're going to get in today. Now, you have advocates, right, who argue that exceptionalism is founded in the ideals of America. America defeating tyrants, right? We beat the British. We ended colonialism for ourselves, right? Or as Lincoln said, quote, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now, people will cherry pick this all day long. And whether you agree with Lincoln or not, especially as we learn more history, right? I'm going to go on a little tangent. If you follow this channel, you know I have a tendency to go on a tangent, and I'm keeping this in here. But as we have come to learn more and more about Lincoln and his actual views, his actual ideology, was he into slavery? No, he was not. He was an abolitionist. However, he did hold the views that we should just send the black African slaves back to Africa He didn't want us here in this country. He just didn't like the idea of enslavement. And, to that fact, I give him credit. Thank you for not upholding those values. But at the same time, really, bro? Like, you don't want us here? We built this country. Whatever. Topic for another day. But that's what we're going to get into here, right? Because you're not taught that in grade school. No, you're taught that Lincoln was this great hero for the black man, right? And woman. But again, going back to that exceptionalism, I said black man, right? We're not going to put the woman in here. And if that offends you, you're going to see why, right? We have to free the black man. All men are created equal, right? That's what this country was founded on, all men. Because at the time, women were nothing. Women were just on par, maybe just a little higher than African slaves. And when our founding fathers created this country, sure, they did struggle. That has come out. The conversation has been had many times that they did struggle with the slave problem. What do we do about slavery? And their thought logic was, okay, we recognize that slavery is wrong. We recognize this. And you know why they recognize this? And here's what they don't want to tell you. But you'll learn it in history if you actually study history. Again, what is my background? I have a bachelor's in history. Loved history growing up. But what they don't tell you is that the founding fathers granted freedom to slaves who did fight in the revolution, right? But that was only because the British were already offering freedom to black slaves who fought alongside British soldiers. You don't believe me? Look at our national anthem. There's a reason why we don't sing the entire national anthem. It goes into, and I'm going to paraphrase, death comes to the slave who fights along the British, pretty much, is what's really plain. I don't know if it's picking that up or not. But death comes to the slave who fights alongside the British. Francis Scott Key was no fan of Africans at all. Vehemently did not like black people. So, the next time people say that you should stand for the anthem, if, somebody is protesting and taking a knee, if that ever comes back up again, remind them that in that national anthem, it's talking about subjugating us. It's talking about the fact that, we're not seen as people. And when I say we, I'm talking about black people. We're not seen as people in that anthem that we stand up for, right? So it's cherry picked. This whole thing is cherry picked. And I say that because, again, the founding fathers were offering freedom to black men to fight for them only because the British were already saying, hey, you fight with us, you're a free person. Because, oh, by the way, slavery in England wasn't a thing, right? It had slavery in other colonies because they did not abolish their slavery until the mid 1800s during the Victorian era, because she was the one Queen Victoria was the one who said, this isn't right, we're getting rid of it. And by the way, we're going to phase it out so that way slaves will, this was her plan. I'm not saying that it worked. I'm not saying that it followed through, but essentially she wanted slaves to be able to profit off of their labor. So the lands that slave owners had, that would be split up and that would go to slaves. And then they would inherit those companies that they were already working for because they were skilled workers, essentially, right? So did it work? Topic for another day. Not going to climb into that basket. But that was the intent. However, in Great Britain at the time, slavery was not a thing, right? It had already been abolished. So the idea was if slaves would leave, fight alongside British soldiers, and moved to England, they'd be free. So America, or the colonies at the time, said, hey, whoa, hold on there. Hold on. How about this? We'll give you your freedom if you fight for us. Now, did that apply to all slaves? No. That applied to black people in the North. That applied to slaves that were able to escape the plantation and fight for the colonial army. That's who that applied for. And then when the war ended and the founding fathers were like, well, what do we do about slavery? They said, well, we're going to kick the can down the road and our children can figure that problem out. Almost 100 years later is when they would figure that out, right? So, this idea that this country was founded for all men to be created equal is a lie. And if you can think critically, which is another thing that teaching American exceptionalism doesn't want you to do, it will numb you to the critical thinking aspect of it because it's just pounded down your throat from grade school on up that America is the best and you shouldn't question it, right? That's a danger of American exceptionalism. And America is the best and you should not question that. It numbs you to that critical thinking. That critical thinking, if you think about it, from day one then, America was not founded that every person was equal because women did not have a right to vote. Black people were not even free. And, oh, by the way, if you were not a white land-owning male, you were not allowed to vote. You had to own land to vote. How many people back then owned land? Not much. So, shoot, white people weren't even equal, right? Since I know I might get some conservatives in here being like, well, you should be grateful. Well, actually, if you did not own land, you were not eligible to vote. You did not have a voice. So really, let's take black people and women out of it. If you were not a white male who owned land, you had no say in what went on. Representation, right? Isn't that what we fought the war for? No taxation without representation? Well, hold on, wait a minute. I don't own land and you're telling me I can't vote, so where's my representation? My thoughts aren't being heard. So, it was never founded on the equality. The founding fathers were selective in who gets freedom. We just talked about slavery. There's one. We just talked about non-landowning white people. There's another one. And I mentioned that women were not allowed to vote. That wouldn't happen until the 1920s. So when did America start becoming great? When did America start becoming the best? You see the holes in American exceptionalism that we can poke very easily without deep diving into all of the dirty details, right? And then we're not even talking about the displaced indigenous people, the Native Americans, right? Whose land we kept stealing all the way up past the 1900s, past the early 1900s, when we kept pushing and pushing and pushing, right? Do we want to go into the details about how we would take young indigenous boys and girls and raise them to be white instead of knowing their own heritage? Do we want to talk about that? We could talk about it another time. Not in this video though. But now that I planted that seed, go ahead and look into that. Because that was going on all the way up until the mid 1900s. But these are the things that we don't want to talk about when we talk about American exceptionalism. This is why we're not allowed to talk about critical race theory. This is why we're banning books, right? This is why we don't want to teach real history, right? You see, Donald Trump even said in 2015, he doesn't like the idea of American exceptionalism. But he hasn't since reversed that. America First doesn't want to talk about any of that. But the thing is that when you don't talk about it, right? When you don't talk about these things, it's going to come up. Because if you sit here all day long and say America's number one, America's the best, be like us, people are going to quickly be like, hold up. What about that right there? What about that right there? What about the fact that you had an entire civil rights movement within the current time frame of people who are living today? In the 1950s, the state of Georgia had a history book, a textbook, that describes how slaves enjoyed the fruits of their labor. They enjoyed being enslaved, and how the massa, right, would barbecue for his slaves. This is what was taught in the 1950s and 60s to school children in the state of Georgia. Newsflash. If you are a millennial like me, and your parents are still alive, and they were from the state of Georgia, they were probably taught this. And if you are black, you know that is a damn lie, right? That's a lie. But this is what they were taught, right? So my parents are still alive. My parents were around when segregation was still a thing. My grandfather was around when segregation in the military was still a thing. Now, he has since passed. All my grandparents have passed. But that does not negate the fact that there are people who are still alive, and there are people who are in power today who were taught that information, right? Civil rights is still being fought for today in 2025. Wait a minute. I thought that the civil rights movement ended in the 60s and 70s, or it started in the 60s and ended in the 70s. No, my friends, it is still around. We are still fighting for it to this day. And if I was good at editing YouTube clips, I'd be saying to this day, I'd be putting that clip in there. So, you know, hold that thought. Hold that thought. But the GOP's goal is to whitewash history. Right? That is their end goal, to whitewash history. So that way, this American exceptionalism is easy to swallow. Because where we see that idea, right? This is where we see that the idea that, you know, we defeated the tyrannical British Empire, right? We abolished slavery, and we just want to stop right there. We don't want to talk about anything else. That's where this comes from. And this is where the lines of patriotism and nationalism start to get blurred, right? Because I would argue that it is a citizen's right of any country, if they are patriotic, to question their government on the hard truths that we don't want to face, right? To question the government on the hard truths that we don't want to face. Yesterday at work, we had a sit down where we all, once a month we do this, right? We sit down and we talk about a hard topic that we don't want to talk about, right? That people generally want to shy away from. Yesterday was about SA and abusers, right? And we watched a TED Talk on it about how this guy starts with, he took my childhood from me, right? We need to do the same thing when we talk about patriotism. Is America a great country, generally speaking? I would actually argue, yes, we are, right? We did abolish slavery. We fought an entire war on that. We did fight against colonialism. But yet, you know, American expansionism, we have territories. Again, clip that clip to this day, right? But it's acknowledging that we still do. We look at Puerto Rico, look at Guam, look at the Kiribati Islands, look at the Marshall Islands, look at the atolls. They belong to us, America. They're not states. Look at America Samoa. Not a state, but they have representation, right? But they can't vote in certain things. Is that right? This is what we should be asking ourselves. See, this is where you get this dialogue where it's not nationalism, but it's patriotism, to question those things. It's not wrong for you to question your government and what your government is doing. But when you sit there and you blindly follow, and I like to call it blind patriotism rather than just nationalism, But you can call it nationalism. You have that nationalistic ideology that your country can do no wrong. America hasn't done anything bad. We fought and won 2 world wars. We entered them late, but we fought and won 2 world wars. Okay, let's talk about those 2 world wars. Were we integrated? No. We weren't integrated. Were soldiers treated fairly? No. Were women allowed to serve? Yes, but to an extent. Could they go into combat? No. Right? But have we gotten there now? Yes. So, positives, right? It's not wrong to question your government. It's not wrong to call it out for its poor and dark history. That's a patriotic thing because we are moving towards doing the right thing, right? You can change. People can change. Again, I say this in a lot of my videos, like Rocky 4 at the end. If I can change and you can change, maybe we can all change. And I believe that. So let's not whitewash our history by saying that, we're not going to talk about that or we're going to ban these books because it's going to make our children not like this country. Actually, maybe if we taught our children, this is what we did wrong, but this is what we're trying to do right. This is what we're trying to rectify. Then maybe our children actually would be proud to be a part of this country. A lot of people right now aren't proud to be a part of this country. A lot of people right now don't want to be here. Or they say things like, why would Greenland want to be a part of us? Maybe if we actually talked openly about our history and we had a truthful dialogue about it, and I'm not talking about from our people, right? Because I'm a citizen. I'm talking about from our leadership. And if states did not sit there and try to hide and conceal the history, maybe if governors, representatives, senators, the president openly talked about it and said, this is what we want to change, maybe Americans would be like, hell yeah, I F's with that, just saying. But did you know that 7 states still don't directly mention slavery in their teachings at the grade school level? 8 states don't mention civil rights, and only 2 states mention white supremacy. 2 out of the 50 states we have mention white supremacy. 16 states list states' rights as the cause of the Civil War. Let that sink in, people. And I already mentioned the 1950s Georgia textbook. So, when you hear that, what does that tell you? And I can guarantee you that out of all those states I mentioned, besides the 2 that mentioned the white supremacy, I can guarantee you that they're all southern states. I'm willing to put money on that the majority of them are southern states, if not all of them. That's a reason why I don't want to move back to the South. Whatever. But we should be able to talk about the great things like fighting in World War I, World War II, all of that, right? We should be able to talk about that. But that doesn't mean that we don't talk about the bad things. Like, for instance, how the CIA operated in the 60s and 70s and 80s in Central and South America, right? Some bad things that we did there. Regime toppling, right? I think we would have learned our lesson. But, and you know what I like about this is that the CIA has a podcast and they even talk about it. See, they're doing their part. The CIA even put out a statement a couple years back. Well, it wasn't the CIA, it was the Director of National Intelligence, the DNI, put out that they want the intel community to be as transparent without obviously breaking laws of talking about ongoing operations and things that are classified, but they want to be as transparent as possible. And the CIA, I feel like, is kind of leading that charge. The CIA doesn't hide from the fact that they made mistakes and messed up in the past. They're owning it. And this isn't, I guess it actually would be propaganda, right? Calling myself out here, but it is kind of propaganda. But it's the good kind of propaganda, if you heard me talk about it, right? And in the cyber world, you have, your red hats and your white hats, right? Your hackers, your ethical hackers. Right? So You do have ethical propaganda. And I think that the DNI's decision to be as transparent as possible is ethical propaganda. Not unethical propaganda, but ethical propaganda. Right? Because when you're transparent with your citizens, and you're open about it, and you own your mistakes, they will trust you. So, with that, I'm going to end this video. Get in the comments, share the video, like and subscribe, hit that bell button. Please, guys and gals, y'all, help me out, right? Let's talk about this. What do you guys think about this? What do you think that American exceptionalism should be taught? And if it is taught, do we teach the dark side of history? Now, obviously, I don't think that a third grader, needs to know all the dark stuff about history. Because again, history can get dark. But should we at least teach them, hey, these people were brought here against their will. They didn't want to, people don't want to be slaves. Children aren't being taught that. And I think that around third grade, a kid should know at a basic level, hey, these people that we brought here that were slaves, they didn't want to be here. Simply put, there you go. You leave it at that, but we fought a war and, they were freed, but it would take 100-something years later for them to finally fairly be, recognized as a person, as a man. And we're still fighting with that today. There you go. That's all you have to leave it at. Oh, well, Mr. Wellington, what you said they're still fighting for it today. Are they not free? Well, we have progress that we still have to make. The LGBTQ community is still fighting for their civil rights, right? They just were able to be married to each other about a decade ago. Actually, a decade ago this year, 2015, right? If I'm not mistaken. And I get it. Some people don't want their kids to learn about that a man can marry a man and a woman can marry a woman, but they don't really care about that. And oh, by the way, they're probably going to have a classmate who has a same-sex parents, right? So it's inevitable. Would you rather them learn it in school in a safe environment, or would you rather them learn it, off the internets? But again, that goes into censorship and all that stuff. And we're seeing that right now with the TikTok ban. Again, American exceptionalism. We're supposed to be the country of free speech, right? But yet we're banning a company just because we can't control the narrative. That's all it boils down to. It's not national security. It's we can't control a narrative. Because if it's national security, it'd be banned for all. But yet they're leaving it open for some government officials and some influencers like Mr. Beast and a couple others, Guy Fieri and all of them, to be able to still use the platform, to be able to push American exceptionalism. So is that free speech? That's not free speech. So again, I think that we should teach these things. I'm not saying that America is not a great country. I'm just saying that, at the end of the day, we need to recognize that this country of ours can do better. And with that, I bid you farewell. And again, please like, subscribe, hit the bell button, share this video, get in the comments, and let me know what you think. Signing off.